The sun was setting behind the suburban rooftops, casting a warm golden hue over our living room. I leaned back in my favorite armchair, watching Susan in the kitchen. She was prepping dinner, her soft laughter mingling with the clinking of pots and pans. There was something about the way she moved, graceful, almost sensual, that always caught my attention. I loved her long, dark hair cascading down her back, the way her jeans hugged her curves just right. "Hey, can you pass me the olive oil?" she called, her voice light and playful. I stood up, feeling the familiar flutter in my stomach, and walked over, appreciating the view of her bent over the counter, focused on her task. The scent of roasted garlic and fresh herbs filled the air, intoxicating and warm, reminiscent of the many evenings we had spent together in this very space. As I handed her the bottle, our fingers brushed, and a small electric jolt ran through me. I smiled, momentarily lost in the moment. We were comfortable, happy even. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle tension that had begun to surface in the last few weeks, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Alex standing there, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He was always so full of energy, with that boyish charm that made him instantly likable. "Hey, man! Hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a grin, stepping inside. "Not at all. We were just about to eat," I replied, trying to mask the sudden pang of jealousy that flickered in my chest. Alex had been spending more time with us lately, often coming over for dinner or just to hang out. Susan seemed to light up whenever he was around, and I couldn't help but notice the way they exchanged glances, the subtle chemistry that crackled between them. As dinner progressed, the atmosphere shifted. Susan's laughter rang out, vibrant and intoxicating, while Alex shared stories of his latest fitness conquests. I watched them, feeling a strange mix of admiration and unease. Their playful banter flowed effortlessly, a dance I felt oddly excluded from. Later, as we moved to the living room, I noticed the way Alex leaned closer to Susan, their shoulders brushing together. It was innocent enough, yet a part of me felt a knot tightening in my stomach. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that Alex was just family, nothing more. But the feeling lingered, and I found myself retreating into my thoughts. When the night finally wound down, I offered to clean up, leaving Susan and Alex to chat in the living room. As I washed the dishes, I could hear their laughter floating in from the other room, each chuckle like a pinprick to my heart. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in my own home. A few days later, everything changed. I had returned home early from work, excited to surprise Susan with dinner. I could already envision her smile, the way her eyes would light up at the thought of spending a cozy evening together. But as I stepped inside, I was met with an unsettling silence. "Susan?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallway. No response. I moved toward the bedroom, my heart racing with an odd sense of dread. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, my breath catching in my throat at the sight before me. Susan and Alex were on the bed, their bodies intertwined in a way that was both intimate and raw. My heart dropped, the reality of betrayal washing over me in waves. I felt like I was drowning, caught in a storm of confusion and rage. The warmth I once felt in our home was replaced with a coldness that seeped into my bones. I stood frozen, my mind racing, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Susan's laughter had always brought me comfort, but now it felt like a dagger to my heart. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but instead, I turned and walked away, leaving them oblivious to my presence. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The images were burned into my memory, each one more painful than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to me like a shadow. Susan, my Susan, was with Alex, and the thought of it twisted like a knife in my gut. Days passed, and the weight of the truth settled heavily on my chest. I found myself torn between confronting Susan and burying the hurt deep inside. Each time Alex came over, the tension simmered just below the surface. I watched them, my emotions a chaotic mix of anger, heartbreak, and an inexplicable curiosity. I began to wonder if there was more to their relationship than I had ever realized. The thought made my stomach churn, yet a darker part of me found an unsettling fascination in it. I wanted to understand what had drawn Susan to him, what had ignited that spark between them. As the nights wore on, I started to imagine scenarios. What if I embraced the situation instead of fighting against it? What if I could watch them, witness their connection? A part of me felt it would be perverse, yet another part whispered that it might also bring me clarity. One evening, as I sat alone in my study, the thoughts spiraled out of control. My curiosity turned into a burning desire to see more, to understand the depths of their betrayal. Little did I know, this was the beginning of a new, dark chapter in my life. One where the lines of love and betrayal would blur in ways I had never anticipated. The next few days blurred into a haze of confusion and anger, yet the more I tried to suppress my thoughts, the more they clawed their way to the surface. I couldn't escape the images of Susan and Alex together, the way she laughed at his jokes, the light in her eyes that danced whenever he was near. It was like a flickering flame, and I was drawn to it, even as it burned. That Friday evening, I made a decision. I would confront Susan. But as I prepared myself, I realized I needed to understand everything first. Curiosity morphed into something darker, a need to see them together, to feel the sharp edges of my emotions. When Alex came over the following weekend, I found myself slipping into the shadows. I pretended to be engrossed in my work while they laughed and chatted in the living room. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a primal urge bubbling beneath the surface. As the night wore on, I heard Susan's soft laughter mixing with Alex's deeper chuckle. They were so at ease, and the sound tugged at something deep within me. I slowly moved to the hallway, peering around the corner. The sight that greeted me sent a shiver down my spine. They were sitting close together on the couch, their bodies nearly touching, the warmth between them tangible. Alex's hand brushed against Susan's, a fleeting moment that seemed innocent enough, yet it felt like a declaration of something deeper. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched her lean in, her hair falling like a curtain, obscuring the world around them. I could see the way her cheeks flushed with laughter, how she bit her lip in a moment of teasing, her body language open and inviting. Alex leaned closer, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh again, a sound that once warmed my heart now felt like a dagger. In that moment, I felt a stirring within me that confused me even more. There was an undeniable intimacy between them, a bond that I had overlooked. I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to be in Alex's place, to hold her like that, to make her laugh until her eyes sparkled. A rush of jealousy mixed with something else, an unsettling desire to witness more, to understand their connection. Before I could lose myself in those thoughts, I stepped back into the shadows, heart racing. It was wrong, I told myself. But as the evening wore on, I found it harder to resist. I wanted to see how far their intimacy went. Eventually, the two of them moved to the kitchen, and I followed quietly, my breath caught in my throat. Susan was pouring a glass of white wine, the soft light glinting off the liquid. Alex stood beside her, leaning casually against the counter, and I could see the way they exchanged glances filled with unspoken words. "Do you remember that time we went to the beach?" Alex asked, his voice low, drawing her closer with each word. I watched as she nodded, her eyes alight with the memory. "Of course. You dared me to go into the water with that ridiculous flow tie." She laughed, and I could feel the warmth radiating from them, the playful energy crackling like electricity. Alex stepped closer, brushing his fingertips against her arm, sending a jolt of awareness through the air. "You look so cute, though. I still can't believe you did it," he said, his voice dropping even lower, more intimate. I felt a swell of anger mixed with something I didn't want to acknowledge. They were crossing a line I had been too blind to see before. And yet, a part of me was fascinated. I wanted to witness it all, to see the depths of their connection. I retreated slightly, my heart pounding, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. My mind raced with thoughts. How had it come to this? I wanted to scream, to confront them, but the voyeuristic thrill held me captive. I was losing myself in this twisted game, and the thrill of the unknown called to me. As they continued to reminisce, the air grew thick with tension. I could feel my heart racing, a primal urge surging within me. When Alex leaned in closer, whispering something that made Susan giggle, I felt an unexpected rush of heat wash over me. "Do you want to try that again sometime?" he asked, his tone teasing, but there was an edge of something more serious in his voice. I felt my breath hitch as I watched Susan's cheeks flush a deeper shade of pink. "Maybe we should. It could be fun," she replied, a playful smile on her lips that sent a wave of emotion crashing over me, desire, jealousy, and something else I couldn't quite name. I had to see more. I had to understand what drew her to him, what made her light up in ways I hadn't seen in months. As the night progressed, I felt myself becoming lost in a whirlwind of emotions. My resolve to confront her weakened, replaced with an overwhelming desire to witness their connection unfold. It was reckless, dangerous even, but it ignited something deep inside me, a curiosity that demanded to be satisfied. I didn't know where this path would lead, but the darker corners of my mind whispered promises I couldn't ignore. The night lingered on, and I found myself caught in a tangled web of desire, betrayal, and an inexplicable longing to see more. I had entered a world I never anticipated, where love and lust danced dangerously close to one another, leaving me breathless and craving answers. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the kitchen thickened with an undeniable tension. I could see the way Susan's laughter came easier, her body leaning in closer to Alex as they reminisced about their beach escapades. It was as if they shared a secret language, one that I was no longer a part of. "Remember when you built that ridiculous sand castle?" Alex teased, and I could see the twinkle in Susan's eyes, the spark of connection igniting further. "You thought it was the greatest architectural feat ever." "Oh, shut up! It was beautiful," she shot back playfully, a lightness in her voice that made my chest tighten. I couldn't help but wonder what else they shared, what other memories bound them together. In a moment that felt suspended in time, Alex reached out, brushing a stray hair from Susan's face. The simple touch sent an electric shock through the air, and I held my breath, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. There was something intimate in that gesture, a tender connection that made my heart race with both anger and an unwanted thrill. As they continued to share stories, I found myself slipping further into the shadows, almost hidden behind the doorframe, wanting to absorb every detail of their chemistry. Alex leaned closer to her, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, and I strained to hear, desperate for any hint of their growing intimacy. "Do you want to go to the beach again this weekend?" he asked, his tone suggestive. "Just the two of us?" I could see Susan's cheeks flush as she bit her lip, a gesture I had always found endearing. I don't know. What about Richard?" she replied, hesitating, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she still cared about me. "He won't have to know," Alex said, his voice smooth, coaxing. "It could be our little secret." At that moment, the air between them thickened, charged with a tension I couldn't ignore. My heart raced as I contemplated the implications of Alex's words. Was she really considering it? The thought twisted in my gut, filling me with a mix of anger and something else, an unexpected desire to understand how far their relationship had progressed. As I listened, I caught snippets of their conversation, but they blurred into a background hum as my mind raced. I was caught in a trap of my own making, watching the woman I loved flirt with her stepbrother, and the darker part of me felt drawn to the unfolding scene. Eventually, they moved to the living room, and I crept behind, my heart pounding. The atmosphere had shifted. Susan sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, while Alex lounged beside her, his arm casually draped over the back. They were comfortable, and it unsettled me in ways I didn't want to admit. "Do you remember how the water felt?" he asked, his gaze locking onto hers, intense and probing. "It was so warm, just like this." As his words lingered in the air, I felt a familiar heat rise within me. I could see Susan's breath quicken slightly, her body leaning into his without her even realizing it. The innocent reminiscence had transformed into something charged, and I was both captivated and horrified. "Yeah," she breathed, and the way she looked at him, there was a hunger there that made my heart drop. It was amazing. It was as if I were watching a scene unfold in slow motion. Alex shifted closer, the space between them narrowing. I held my breath, a tumultuous mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them, to demand answers. But another part, a darker side, craved to see how this would play out. "What if we went for a swim together?" he suggested, his voice a low murmur. "Just the two of us, like old times?" Susan's eyes widened slightly, and I could see her battling with the thought. "I don't know, Alex." "Come on," he coaxed, leaning in, his voice dripping with seduction. "It could be fun. Just a little adventure. I promise to keep it a secret." The tension in the room escalated, palpable and thick. I was a witness to their unfolding dance of attraction, the lines of morality blurring before my eyes. I couldn't tear my gaze away, even as the betrayal cut deep within me. Suddenly, Alex's hand brushed against Susan's knee, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of heat coursing through my veins. I watched, breathless, as her breath caught, and the moment hung in the air like a charged electric current. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a soft laugh, a sound filled with longing and intrigue. "Okay, fine. Just one swim." She relented, and I felt my heart shatter. It was as if she had just sealed our fate, their secret rendezvous spiraling further out of my control. "I'll pick you up at 6?" he proposed, a grin spreading across his face, and my heart raced with a mix of fury and helplessness. "Sure," Susan replied, her voice tinged with excitement. As they made plans, I felt my heart sinking. This was not just a harmless swim. It was a step into the unknown, a deepening of their bond that I could no longer ignore. I was teetering on the edge of something darker, where jealousy and desire intermingled in a tangled web. The night passed in a blur, and when I finally lay in bed, my thoughts raced with the implications of what I had witnessed. I felt an odd mix of betrayal and an unexpected thrill at the prospect of what lay ahead. Would I follow them? Would I confront them? As the hours slipped away, I found myself lost in the possibilities, trapped between the pain of betrayal and a growing curiosity about the relationship I was too blind to see. I could feel my heart thrumming in my chest as I drifted into a restless sleep, dreams haunted by the echoes of their laughter and the promise of a dangerous adventure just out of reach. The next evening arrived too quickly, my anticipation and dread swirling together like a tempest. I had spent the day pretending to focus on work, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of Susan and Alex's impending swim. As the clock struck 5, I felt my heart racing, each tick amplifying my anxiety. I couldn't shake the image of them together, their bodies glistening with water, laughter echoing in the warm evening air. When 6 o'clock finally rolled around, I found myself pacing the living room, torn between confronting her and simply watching. I had never felt so vulnerable, and yet so intensely curious. The idea of witnessing their chemistry in person sent shivers down my spine. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard the doorbell ring. I froze for a moment, my breath hitching in my throat. I glanced at myself in the hallway mirror, trying to compose my expression into something neutral, even though my heart was pounding like a war drum. I opened the door to find Alex standing there, casual and confident in a fitted t-shirt and swim trunks that clung to his toned physique. He looked every bit the part of the charming stepbrother, and my stomach twisted at the sight of him. "Hey man! Ready for a fun night?" he grinned, his enthusiasm evident. Yeah? She's just getting ready," I managed to reply, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. As he stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of the excitement in his eyes. He was here for her, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Cool. I'll just wait in the living room," he said, plopping down on the couch, clearly relaxed and at home. I watched him, my insides churning as I envisioned the two of them splashing around together, the intimacy of the water wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Moments later, Susan appeared from the hallway, and my breath caught in my throat. She wore a simple bikini beneath a flowing cover-up, her hair cascading down her shoulders, still slightly damp from her earlier shower. She looked stunning, and for a brief second, I felt that familiar warmth returning, a reminder of the woman I fell in love with. "Ready!" she announced, and I could see the excitement in her eyes, the way she lit up at the thought of spending time with Alex. My heart sank again as I saw Alex's gaze flicker over her, the unmistakable admiration in his eyes. "Wow, you look amazing, Susan," he said, his voice low and sincere, causing a flutter of something deep within me, an unsettling mix of jealousy and an odd thrill at how their chemistry crackled in the air. "Thanks. I thought it would be fun to relive those beach days," she replied, her smile wide and inviting, as if she were sharing a private joke with him. As they made their way toward the door, I felt an overwhelming urge to intervene, to pull Susan back and demand answers. But instead, I remained rooted in place, a silent observer as they stepped outside, the evening air wrapping around them like a soft blanket. I followed them outside, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of purple and orange. As they reached the car, I couldn't help but notice the easy way they interacted. Alex was playful, teasing her about how she had forgotten her towel, and Susan responded with a playful roll of her eyes, their laughter echoing like a haunting melody. Once they drove away, I stood there, torn between a desire to follow and an urge to retreat into the safety of our home. The emptiness of the house felt suffocating, and I knew I needed to see more. The darker side of my curiosity urged me to follow them, to understand what was unfolding. I decided to take my own car, trailing behind them as they drove toward the beach. The adrenaline surged through me, a mix of fear and exhilaration. The beach was mostly deserted at this time of night, the sound of waves crashing against the shore creating a rhythm that matched my racing heart. As I parked at a distance, I watched them from the shadows, hidden behind a cluster of palm trees. They had spread out a blanket on the sand, laughter spilling into the air, and I felt my breath hitch as I observed them. Alex pulled off his t-shirt, revealing his toned chest, and I felt an involuntary rush of anger. He was so confident, so relaxed, as if he belonged there with her. Susan followed suit, the cool breeze catching her cover-up as she let it slip off her shoulders, revealing her bikini in all its glory. I was captivated, yet overwhelmed by the swirl of emotions within me. My heart raced as I watched her laugh, her head thrown back, the moonlight dancing across her skin. Alex's eyes gleamed with admiration, and I felt the heat of jealousy burning in my chest. "Let's swim!" he called, pulling her into the cool waters of the ocean. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the shore as if she were torn. But then he splashed her, laughter ringing out in the night, and she couldn't resist. The two of them tumbled into the water, their bodies merging into the waves, and I felt my breath quicken. The sight of them together was intoxicating, a mix of longing and betrayal, and I couldn't help but feel drawn into their world. From my hidden spot, I watched as they swam and played, the water glistening against their skin. I could see the way they moved together, effortlessly navigating the waves, laughter and splashes punctuating the air. I felt like an intruder, a voyeur witnessing something I wasn't meant to see. When they finally emerged from the water, their hair slicked back, their laughter rang out in the night like music. The tension had shifted to something electric, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest, an inexplicable need to know how far their connection went. As they settled back on the blanket, I could see them leaning closer, their shoulders brushing against one another, the air thick with unspoken words. My breath caught as Alex brushed his hand along her back, a touch that lingered just a moment too long. "Do you remember that moment at the beach when we almost kissed?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. I could see Susan's cheeks flush, the hint of something wild flickering in her eyes. "Yeah, I do," she replied, her tone teasing, yet there was a deeper layer to it, a vulnerability that both excited and terrified me. "Maybe we should make up for that," he said, his voice dropping even lower, the intent clear. I held my breath, the reality of the situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. The unthinkable was unfolding before my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. Would she give in to the temptation? Would they cross that line, solidifying the betrayal that loomed like a dark cloud over our marriage? The night wore on, and I remained hidden, caught between the haunting desire to confront them and the inexplicable urge to watch. I was on the precipice of something I had never anticipated, my heart racing as I prepared to witness the unfurling of a connection that threatened to consume us all. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, casting a silver glow over the beach, the atmosphere between Susan and Alex shifted, growing thicker with tension. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the mix of anger, desire, and desperation swirling within me like a storm. "Do you think Richard would be upset if he knew we were here?" Susan asked, her voice teasing yet laced with genuine concern. I could see her biting her lip, a gesture I knew well, one that usually meant she was feeling uncertain. "Come on, it's just a swim. He'd never find out," Alex replied, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a sultry whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "Besides, it's not like we're doing anything wrong." Susan chuckled softly, but the glint in her eyes told me she was torn. "I suppose you're right. He's probably busy working anyway." My stomach churned at her words. Did she really believe that? Or was she trying to convince herself? As they sat there on the blanket, the tension between them thickened, and I could feel my breath hitching at the sight of Alex's hand resting casually on her thigh, fingers brushing against her skin with a tenderness that made my heart race. "Do you remember that time we almost kissed?" Alex asked, his gaze locked onto hers, an intensity in his eyes that sent a wave of heat surging through me. "Yeah, I remember," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, and I could see the way her breath quickened. "I was so nervous." "Why?" "You were so beautiful that day," he said, his voice low, coaxing her in, drawing her closer with each word. "You shouldn't have been afraid." My heart pounded as I watched her lean in, the distance between them evaporating. Their chemistry was palpable, and I felt like I was intruding on something deeply intimate. I was a voyeur, hidden in the shadows, unable to look away from the tension crackling in the air. In a moment that felt suspended in time, Alex brushed a finger along her jawline, his touch feather-light yet electric. "I've always wanted to kiss you, you know," he admitted, his voice a husky whisper. I felt a wave of heat rush through me as Susan's breath caught in her throat. "Alex," she began, her voice trembling with uncertainty, yet there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something that said she was teetering on the edge of surrender. "Just one kiss," he urged, leaning in closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. I could see the conflict in her expression, the desire battling against the boundaries of our relationship. It was maddening to watch, yet I felt an overwhelming need to see what would happen next. As he leaned in, time seemed to stretch, and my heart raced in my chest. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, a mixture of dread and an inexplicable thrill at the prospect of what might unfold before me. I wanted to scream, to run to them and pull Susan away, but I was frozen in place, unable to look away. Their lips were mere inches apart, the tension in the air thickening like a storm cloud ready to burst. And then it happened, a soft brush, a tentative meeting that ignited a fire within me. Susan's eyes fluttered closed as their lips finally met, a gentle caress that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted. I was watching my wife kiss another man, and the raw intensity of the moment consumed me. My emotions swirled in a chaotic blend of anger, jealousy, and an unexpected thrill at witnessing the connection they shared. Their kiss grew more fervent, a dance of passion that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I watched as Alex pulled her closer, their bodies aligning in a way that felt so natural, as if this was always meant to happen. Susan melted against him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him deeper, and I felt a pang of longing, a desperate wish that it could be me. As they lost themselves in the kiss, I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a mixture of betrayal and desire flooding my senses. This was not just an affair, this was something real, something that threatened to shatter the life we had built together. I felt lost, like a ghost haunting the edges of their intimacy, unable to escape the reality of what I was witnessing. And yet, in that moment, I couldn't tear myself away. I was a spectator in this twisted play of love and betrayal, my heart pounding as I grappled with the complexity of my emotions. Would I ever confront them? Did I even want to? As the kiss deepened, I felt a dark thrill run through me. A part of me was captivated by their connection, entranced by the way they fit together. It was something I had once shared with Susan, and yet, in this moment, it felt like it was slipping away, replaced by something new and exhilarating. The world around me faded, leaving only the sound of the waves crashing against the shore and the sight of them lost in each other. I was trapped in a web of emotions, torn between anger and desire, a silent witness to a betrayal that felt both devastating and strangely intoxicating. I realized I was at a crossroads, caught between the desire to confront the truth and the temptation to allow this moment to unfold. My heart raced as I contemplated my next move, knowing that whatever decision I made would alter the course of our lives forever. As the kiss lingered, the world around me faded into a distant hum. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, the rhythm echoing the tumult of emotions swirling within me. The sight of Susan entwined with Alex, lost in a moment that was both beautiful and heartbreaking, ignited something deep inside, a primal urge to confront the truth, to shatter this illusion of happiness they shared. I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like an anchor, threatening to drown me in despair. I wanted to scream, to run out from my hiding place, and pull Susan back into the safety of our life together. But I was frozen, caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, unable to move as I witnessed the unthinkable. As they broke the kiss, their foreheads still touching, I could see the glimmer of something electric in Susan's eyes. She was radiant, filled with a joy that had been absent for too long. Alex's hand cradled her face, his thumb gently caressing her cheek as if he were afraid she might disappear. The sight cut me to the core, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. "Why are we doing this?" Susan asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The vulnerability in her tone tugged at my heartstrings, and I felt a flicker of hope that she might realize the gravity of the situation. "Because it feels right," Alex replied, his voice smooth and soothing. "You deserve to feel alive, to explore what you want." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't remain a silent observer any longer. I needed to confront this betrayal head-on, to bring everything into the light. My heart raced as I took a deep breath, the weight of my decision heavy in the air. "Enough!" I shouted, stepping out from behind the palm trees. The words erupted from my lips, raw and unfiltered. The moonlight illuminated the scene, casting a stark glow on the three of us, and I felt the tension crackle in the air like a live wire. Susan turned, her expression a mix of shock and guilt, while Alex quickly stood up, eyes wide as he took a step back. The moment shattered like glass, the intimacy between them evaporating in an instant. "Richard!" Susan exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief. Don't. Just don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "I saw everything. The kiss, the way you looked at each other. This isn't just a harmless swim, Susan. You're crossing a line that we can't come back from." Susan's cheeks flushed, and I could see the regret flooding her features. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she stammered, stepping toward me, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Then how did you want me to find out?" I shot back, the hurt spilling out like a torrent. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the way you've been acting? The way you light up around him? I was confused. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice trembling, and I could see the tears pooling in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I replied, the words cutting like a knife. "You kissed him, Susan. You shared something real, something that should belong to us. How can we move past this?" Alex stepped in, a protective stance, but I held up my hand. "This is between us," I said sharply, turning my attention back to Susan. "You have to choose, Susan. What do you want?" Tears streamed down her face, and I could see the conflict warring within her. "I love you, Richard. I really do," she sobbed, the sincerity in her voice hitting me like a punch to the gut. "But I can't deny what's happening with Alex. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I echoed, the bitterness lacing my words. "It's a betrayal, Susan. I can't pretend this doesn't hurt. You have to decide if you want to fight for us or if you want to explore whatever this is with him." The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I watched as she looked between Alex and me, her heart divided. The anguish in her eyes mirrored the chaos in my own heart, and I felt a sense of helplessness wash over me. Finally, she took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking as she straightened. I need time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't make this decision right now. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Time? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You want time to figure out if you want to be with me or him? I need to understand what this all means, she replied, her eyes pleading for compassion. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't ignore this either. With that, I felt a deep chasm opening between us. The love we had built over the years seemed fragile, threatening to crumble beneath the weight of her choices. Then maybe you should go with him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the pain tearing at my insides. Richard, she started, but I raised my hand again, silencing her. Just go, I said, my voice firm despite the crack in my heart. Figure out what you want. I need to know if you're willing to fight for us or if this is where it ends. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me, desperation etched across her features. I don't want to lose you, she said, her voice shaking. Then make your choice, I replied, my voice unwavering despite the storm of emotions churning within me. With one last glance at both of us, she took a step back, uncertainty etched into her every movement. She looked at Alex, and I could see the tension between them, an unspoken understanding that this moment had changed everything. I'll call you, she said, the words hanging heavily in the air before she turned away, walking toward the car parked nearby. Alex hesitated for a moment, looking between us, but I didn't want to engage. I had nothing left to say to him. He had crossed the line too, and now it was up to Susan to make her choice. As she drove away, the reality of what had just happened crashed over me like a tidal wave. I felt hollow inside, a void where love and trust had once thrived. The echoes of her laughter, the warmth of our shared moments, all faded into the background, leaving me standing alone on that beach. I had opened the door to the truth, and now it loomed before me, raw, painful, and uncertain. I stood there, watching the taillights disappear into the night, my heart heavy with unanswered questions and the lingering scent of betrayal. The future felt uncertain, yet as I turned to face the darkened ocean, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey I never anticipated. A journey toward healing, understanding, and perhaps a new beginning, whether with Susan or without her. As the waves crashed against the shore, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the path ahead, one that would lead me to rediscover who I was, beyond the heartbreak, and reclaim the pieces of my life. The choice was hers now, but I knew I had to find my own way, no matter how daunting it felt.